Well, welcome back to the Energy Sovereignty Project, and you'll notice that this video is titled Part 1. What we're going to do is we're going to head back over to the studio and we're going to take a little look at Tesla's new virtual power plant. Now, in this video, we'll go over what the virtual power plant actually is. For those that have followed the channel for a while now, you'll know that about a year and a half ago or so, we did a little spot on Tesla applying to the PUC to actually become a utility. And this is what that was all about. We didn't know at the time when they were going to go into full implementation, and frankly, we still don't. But what we're going to do today is we're going to go ahead and go over where they are currently with the beta release version of this and how it ties everything together. Solar production, battery storage at the home, and then possibly in the future for cars and the way that the car charging integrates with the home. So my suggestion would be to like and subscribe to this video, and as we start to learn more about how this integration actually works, we'll go ahead and show you the numbers, because I think that we have a lot to offer. This system is a bit larger than most. We have 6 of the Powerwall 2s, and so our ability to contribute to the grid actually exceeds the size of the line for the most part. We have the ability to actually contribute 30 kilowatts to the grid, 37 if you include, or 36 and change if we're also running the home, but 36, 37 kilowatts if you include what we're capable of producing with the solar on the roof. And that's a fairly large burden. We'll go over what that means as far as the line sizes for home, and what an average home's breaker would be able to withstand. Touch on maybe what modifications might be needed at a later date if you're looking at doing things like vehicle to grid. I know there's been a lot of folks that were really interested in the capabilities of that. So let's head back over to the studio and take a look at some numbers. Well, welcome back to the studio. So at this point, most of you probably heard that Tesla is beta testing their application, their software version for their virtual power plant. So before we go into exactly what a virtual power plant is, let's talk a little bit about where Tesla is with their testing, what they're hoping to achieve with that beta testing. And so the beta testing of their software is basically just that. It's a toe in the water. I don't believe that there's very many places where Tesla yet has any kind of saturation where they could actually show any measurable amount of grid relief. But we'll cover why that is in a little bit. But what they can and are most certainly testing is they're testing the waters as far as working with the utilities. In order to implement what we're going to show you in a minute here, they're going to first have to demonstrate to the utilities that they have control over the products that they sell, and that they're going to have verifiable response times, and that they're going to be able to react in a way that isn't going to hurt the grid. And they're doing this by getting people to agree to the beta software and allow Tesla to control the Powerwalls, and then that will allow them to discharge for brief periods of time to the grid. And will they? Well, at this point, that all depends on a lot of different things. So with PG&E customers, I think that they'll actually have to play ball, because the state of California basically bailed out PG&E, and so they're more or less beholden to higher powers, and so I think that they will be. And additionally, the events over the last few years have really left them with a bit of a black eye that I'm sure they're eager to try and fix by, leapfrogging off of Tesla's popularity and cooperating with these kinds of grid-wide solutions. So I think if you're a PG&E customer and you sign up for this beta, you'll probably actually see a few ticks. And then likewise, those who are in the area that's controlled by Southern California Edison, you'll probably also wind up seeing some usage of this, because they already have invested heavily in Tesla's switching and grid stabilization technology down there with the replacement for peaker plants where they've installed large battery banks down there. So them too, I think that they'll wind up also seeing some utilization. But in our case, well, our provider is Sacramento Municipal Utilities District, or SMUD, and so SMUD has, in decades now, kind of isolated themselves from the other utility providers, and they're claiming some superiority based on being community proactive and all of that. But unfortunately, the community that they're serving has been actually doing battle with them over the last several years, and they're doing battle with them over home solar and batteries. Now, initially, SMUD said, oh, batteries are evil. Didn't want to talk to anybody about batteries. No, that was a dumb idea, and we're not going to try and support that in any ways. Well, behind the scenes, they're studying the battery technology. Why? Well, because now, all of a sudden, when they release the batteries to the customers might lease from them. Now, all of a sudden, batteries are a great idea. But what they don't want is they don't want you to own them in any large degree. And so, because of that, I don't think that I'm going to be having my Powerwalls activated anytime soon. But we'll remain vigilant and hopeful and see what happens as far as SMUD is concerned. I'm in touch with a couple other folks that also have Powerwalls that are SMUD customers, and so we'll see what happens there. But we'll see. So, what is a virtual power plant? Well, let's tackle that question in a couple of different ways. Best way that I can think to start us off as we kind of layer this cake so that we can look at it is to take a look at a suburban residential grid of houses. So here, what you see is basically several neighborhoods all strung together, and we'll start by taking a quick look at the rough solar density that we have here. This is a block of older homes, and you can see here that in the older homes, out of this some 26 homes or so pictured, only one of them has solar. And then we start to look at some of the areas that were built up more recently when they actually had a requirement for solar, that they all be solar ready at least. And so here's one of the newer sections where we see nearly all the homes have at least some solar. How much of that is compliance or not, I don't know. We'll talk about that a little bit at the end. But and then the average being this kind of group here that we see, where out of these 26 homes or so, you got 6 that have solar. And what's also important to remember is that these photos were taken a couple of years ago, and so things have changed. There's been an increase in build out in the solar systems. But for what we're going to do here, that's not important. Let's just focus on just kind of a smattering of homes to give us an idea of when you energize this virtual grid, what does it look like? And so let's start off by identifying a couple of key infrastructure elements. Here, what you see are the 2 substations that are located at either end of the community. Now, I'm not sure what the incoming voltage, typically you're looking at somewhere around 70,000 volts or so. With the community-wide voltage, we'll get to that in a second, step down through a series of transformers to 12 to 14,000 volts. Depends on your local utility, and I haven't actually wound up looking into that, but that's a range that's in there. And it's, again, for what we're doing here, that's all that you really need to know is that outside of those substations, it's about 70,000 volts. Once those substations get it, they step it down to about 14,000 volts, distribute it through the grid system. So why do they do that? Well, the reason for that is that the higher voltage transmitted, the more power that you can transmit over a greater distance and not use as much amperage and not have as much loss in the wires. And so you can run longer distances. In this case, you've got it where you're coming from the power plant to the substation, and then it steps it down, but the voltage is still relatively high. And then you transmit that power from the substations out through this grid, where then they are tapped by the individual transformers. Now, one thing that I'm unsure of as we call this up here is that you see these two substations. I don't know whether or not they equally feed this community that you see, or whether or not it's split in half. But again, as we pull this up, you'll see that that won't really matter for what it is that we're trying to accomplish here. So anyway, like I said, once the high voltage has run the distance from the power plant, it's stepped down by those two substations to 14K or so, 14,000 volts or so, and then it hits these transformers here. And the neighborhood pad that we see here, we use those instead of the pole-mounted transformers. In your neighborhood, you may still have the pole-mounted transformers. I don't know. Here's another image, and each of these pad-mounted transformers feeds 8 homes. At least that's how it is in this particular neighborhood. So remember that for a little bit. We're going to get back to that in a minute. So okay, so now we're ready to have a little bit of fun. Because I love this kind of thing, and I knew that, oh, you know, I'll be able to use this, you know, with other things at some point in the future, and also because I'm a bit nuts. I actually went through and I counted every single solar roof in this entire how this might work eventually. And so I tried to make each dot also approximately the size of a home. And so let me go ahead and blink these on and off a couple of times here so that you can see the rough distribution of them. Okay, and now let's go ahead and pull up that grid that I was talking about. And if you can't see some of the individual dots now, don't worry about that. They're just there to kind of give you a rough idea of the general distribution. So, you know, don't worry about that too much. The main thing that we're going to be looking at is the grid. And if that's difficult to see, also don't worry about that. We're going to be coloring in some of those squares in a minute. So you'll be able to see a better visualization of how that all works. But one other fun thing to look at is that at either end on the north side of that the neighborhood here, you see, are a Raley's department store and a Kohl's, a Raley's supermarket and a Kohl's department store. So each of them has approximately 1,200 panels or 400 kilowatts of PV on the roof. So we look at it again math-wise. It's fun. So this system is roughly 40 times the size of what we have for the Energy Sovereignty Project. So if we look at what the Energy Sovereignty Project was producing on any given day, it gives us a way to figure out approximately what these guys are producing and delivering to the grid. And so if we take a day like July 23rd, we produced 52.8 kilowatt hours at the Energy Sovereignty Project home. And so each of these would have produced 2.112 megawatt hours for a total of about 4.2 megawatt hours each for the day. Now, the problem there is that neither one of these, I don't believe either one of these has any on-site battery storage. And so they are actually contributing to the issue that the virtual power plant is trying to solve. Now, in a future video, I'm going to go to these guys and I'm going to try and see if I can find out how much power they use in a day, so that we can get a rough idea of if they did have batteries, what would that eventually look like. And we'll do that for a future follow-up video. That should be kind of fun. But for now, we have all the information that we need to have some fun with this. So this all starts at the home level. And so again, making some assumptions to make our math easier, we're going to assume that each home has 10 kilowatts of production and that each home has 60 kilowatt hours of battery storage, or 4 Powerwalls. And that number, 4 Powerwalls, isn't as, that number is more important than the amount of storage that they actually have. And the reason for that is that each of these Powerwalls is able to then output 5 kilowatts to the grid, supposedly, to help shore it up. Okay, so let's get started. So looking at this community, we see all of the houses here in orange that do not have any solar at all. Now, excuse me, by houses I mean grids. So each one of these squares, again, remember, is one of those transformers, 8 houses. Okay. Now, if any one in any of these grids turns on so much as a light bulb, it's going to have current traveling to them. The current will follow the path of least resistance. That least resistance then goes to a load. And so again, all of these homes here are going to be drawing power all of the time. And so then the question becomes, how much power are they drawing and where are they getting their power from? Okay, so here's the thought experiment that we're going to go ahead and do. So we paint this scenario. It's 3 p.m. It's a couple hours before people are going to really start coming home. Some are already home. They're turning on the AC because even if your home's really well insulated, from around 1 p.m. or so, the AC, again, going by what we did with the Energy Sovereignty Project and tracking what our AC did this time of year, around 1 o'clock, 1 in the afternoon, your AC system starts to ramp up to try and keep the house cool. Well, by 3 o'clock, that sumbitch is running, right? So that's where we're going with this. So how does the virtual power plant deal with this? So now remember the assumptions. We've got it's sometime in the future, maybe 4 or 5 years, when all of the homes that are producing solar, they have 10 kilowatts of production. All of them have roughly 60 kilowatt hours of battery storage. Again, we already know from the Energy Sovereignty Project that if you have 1 or 2 cars in a decent sized family, that, you know, maybe 80 to 90 is probably more appropriate as far as what you'd be looking at, but we're going to go with 60 because, again, that's those four power walls here. So the call goes out to the virtual power plant that the grid needs relief to avoid a rolling blackout caused by the duct curve, right? And so to keep things simple, you know, we're going to say that each home is drawing 5 kilowatts. Now, again, we're lucky we have all of that data from the Energy Sovereignty Project to go back on. We know that our home, near as makes no difference, draws 5 kilowatts when the AC is on. So we're going to assume that from 3 to 4 p.m., the period of time where we're actually examining this, all these homes are cranking. People have gotten on their remote apps and turned their AC on so the houses are cool when they get home, or there's a homemaker at home to go ahead and fire up the AC systems. So the AC systems, again, historically from what we know from our study, uses 4 kilowatts, and the home itself fills in the rest with maybe 1 and change as to run the home. So that helps to keep the math nice and neat for the little experimenters. So each pink dot has the ability to handle 5 homes, and it runs itself on solar, and then the 4 additional power walls power one home each. And so each grid here contains 8 homes. And so in total, the community has 355 virtual power plants for a total of 7.1 megawatts that will be able to be delivered between 4 and 5 p.m. Now, the problem here is that they have to fill up their own grid square before they can contribute to the total load on the grid. Just like your individual home, you have to first fulfill all of your home's usage before you can actually then start to export power to your grid, and then you have to fill up that all the homes on that one transformer before they can then help contribute to the grid overall. And so the grid won't feed any excess power back out until it's full. So with that in mind, let's go ahead and color in our grid. So the areas here that you see now in green are those transformers whose load is totally covered by the virtual power plants that sit inside. That is to say, 40 kilowatts with enough left over then to power the 2 additional homes. So the areas in yellow, we'll go ahead and bring this up here, are the areas where a little over half of the load in those grids are covered. And that's, again, between 25 kilowatts or 5 or so out of the 8 homes. And so now you can see that those that remain in orange that are not covered by the virtual power plant in this scenario, those are going to have to still continue to get their power from the grid. And when looking at these charts, also remember that the squares that turn from orange to green or yellow represent groups of 8 houses. So when you see the squares that change colors there, that's not an inconsequential amount of power that we're talking about. So that is a considerable amount of relief for those areas. And so you can see that even in this early stage, if we add batteries to the solar producing homes, virtual power plants can send quite a bit of power out to the grid to relieve that strain. So where are we now? Well, currently there aren't any areas that I'm aware of where there's anywhere near this saturation of power walls. And so during our last power outage, I took the opportunity to ride around the neighborhoods with my electric skateboards to try and find which houses still had their lights on. And so, granted, the area that I rolled through was only maybe about, I don't know, a quarter of the size of what it is that we're looking at here. But I only spotted 2 houses beside my own that had their lights on, and I don't know, they may have had limited battery backup on very few circuits, maybe just enough to run the refrigerator or something like that. But I think at this stage, if I were to look at that entire area, I think it would be reasonable to say that probably 3 people out of all of those that you see have power walls. But again, I'm not sure. I don't have any data to go with on that. So with such a small saturation, Tesla's using their beta testing to just kind of help them identify problems that might occur with the software, just to try and work the bugs out of the whole thing operationally. And so that's basically how the virtual power plant works, to try and alleviate things. I'm going to try and find out, like I said, how much extra power each day that the Rayleighs and the Coles produce, try and get an idea, a feel for how much of their needs can actually then be shunted out to the community-wide grid, to also try and take some pressure off of there, instead of adding the equivalent of 40 homes without batteries to the duct curve. So, but last thing we'll close everybody off with here is people have asked what happens in the case of a total blackout. Will the virtual power plant be able to maintain the power in your community? And the answer to that right now, and probably into the foreseeable future, is no. Obviously, it will still continue to power your own home. That'll be unaffected. But the problem that I think you wind up with in these smaller grid areas is what I call signal saturation. And when you're running your Powerwall currently, if the power goes off, the Powerwall knows that, oh, I now no longer see an AC sine wave coming down, and so I'm going to go ahead and switch over to battery power, and we're going to isolate ourselves, and it actually runs itself in a little loop. The Powerwalls now supply that AC sine wave to your inverters for your solar, so that it keeps your solar system running as its own little power plant. Now, it can do this because it's notified the gateway, or the gateway has notified the Powerwalls that there's no power outside, and it's cut that power off. And so consequently, if someone then goes out to work on the utility lines, they're not going to be risking getting fried by your power going out the lines. Well, if you wind up having, say, a supersaturation of people providing solar, all of those Powerwalls have synced themselves to the grid. So they're all on the same page. Well, if the grid then goes down, where are you getting that signal from? So at some point, Tesla's going to maybe have to send a very special signal so that it knows that in its area, and that, again, it's going to have to be become a standard, so that it knows that if you see this signal on the grid, that is an artificial grid, that then will notify all of the other systems that, oh, okay, I'm receiving a signal, an AC signal from the artificial grid. If you don't do that, then that signal is just going to be sympathetic, and nobody's Powerwall is going to know that the grid is actually down because they're still receiving that signal from the grid that says everything's fine. And so that becomes a problem then if you're trying to work on some individual transformer. So they've got some things to try and work out before it's possible for the virtual power plants within a community to actually be able to buck up the power to the point where they'll be able to do that. And so, very last thing, I promise this is the last thing I'll leave you with, is that most of the homes that we looked at in that area are like this one. Here you see this one has 35 panels, so it's producing a little over 10 kilowatt of production, much like the energy sovereignty home is. And that's adequate solar. And if this person had Powerwalls, I'm sure they're running fat, dumb, and happy. I think that this would be a good candidate again for 4 to 6 Powerwalls. They'll be able to charge their cars off of it. It would be nice if they added a bit more solar, if we were allowed to be able to then put on this house to fill out that front facing there. That's the westward side, and maybe even put some panels on the northward side. Again, we're at a latitude where we can get away with that, and these roofs aren't steeply pitched. They don't have to get rid of snow or anything. So that this house could conceivably have in the 17 to 20 kilowatt production range, and that would get them through ostensibly through winter. But we also have a few of these homes. Who did this? I'm hoping that it is a product of the person's finances. Again, I wish this were more affordable. They're trying to get as many programs out as possible to make solar affordable. As we hit economies of scale, these, the affordability will be there so that everybody can partake. But I'm hoping that this was not the case where the utility company told this poor guy that he could only put 13 panels on his house. Really? I mean, he's got still a lot of prime real estate on his roof that he could be able to produce his entire need in winter. But the utility companies, they see this coming. This is their nightmare. And if this guy has batteries, then the only thing he's going to be doing is exporting his excess power. During the summer, he's going to be able to completely keep up. His batteries will be full. He'll be able to come home, charge his vehicle at night off of that. And then as we enter into the complete winter months, maybe he'll have to fill a little bit of shortfall, even with charging a car or so. So that might be interested in seeing that. I hope that was an interesting introduction in how a virtual power plant works and how it all works together to try and alleviate some of the load on the system, even at these early stages where we are now. If every home had 4 Powerwalls, then we could conceivably really change how this all comes together, even in the short term. So good luck with all of your own systems as usual, and hope you like and subscribe. We'll go ahead and try and fill you in on anything that happens in the future if we're actually tapped on the shoulder to have our system help contribute to furthering this along. Well, we will absolutely let you know. So hit that bell and keep up with the updates. Thanks for joining us.